this life ain't fair. And I know that you're going nowhere. Well, don't blame me for what you've done, because I know that you are having fun.
Welcome to the Clarified Realty Podcast, exposing the real estate secrets your agent doesn't want you to know. Here's your host, Tom Clary.
Well, don't you just walk away. That's when I'll say.
Welcome to the Clarified Realty Podcast. I'm Tom Clary. I'm a real estate agent licensed here in beautiful, sunny Los Angeles, California. And yes, I mean sunny. We're in the middle of winter, and we've had a full 2 days of rain this month, and I think the traffic is still trying to recover. Thanks for coming back. We're recording this episode a little bit in advance. We're just a few days after Thanksgiving, and we're moving headlong into the holidays, and I am, for one, ready for a little Yuletide escapism. The shopping has begun in earnest, and I'm ready for a healthy dose of fa-la-la-la-la, Christmas carols, mistletoe, all that. Also, here's my sidekick / loan officer, Ron Bruno. Ron, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tom. How are you?
Good. I'm getting really ready for this Christmas season. I need it. I definitely need it.
It's good to have a little bit of a break, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably going to be releasing this a little bit after Christmas, but right now, I'll tell you something. I see the trees being sold on the corner and all that, and I just kind of I keep on getting transported back in time to Christmas past.
We took care of all of that this weekend. We got our tree, and we also had our our second Thanksgiving dinner. We had Thanksgiving with friends.
Nice.
First, which was great. They taken all the orphans, so all the people that have family on the East Coast, we were able to all come together, and then my wife and I, we had a nice little family Thanksgiving by the Christmas tree, which it was
Nice.
That's kind of a nice thing.
Very good.
Yeah, so it was a nice relaxing weekend, and with the rain, it's a nice. It's nice to get cozy. So
nice.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was just literally, when we were talking about this, reminded me of when I was talking about Christmas carols and all that. This was back when I was a teenager. I went to Magic Mountain, and it was on Christmas Eve day. Right, and Magic Mountain is amusement park here in Southern California, and
Six Flags,
Magic Mountain, and they had one of those big Christmas shows, right, where you go in, and it was freezing cold, but we had to do something in between rides on Colossus or whatever, right? And so we go into this it's kind of like a musical theater kind of thing, right? And they have this wonderful show, like where they've got these people who, God bless them, it's Christmas Eve, and they're singing their hearts out. They're singing all the old standards, the sleigh bells ring, that kind of stuff. But one of the things I remember this like it was yesterday. There was this one girl who was like the star singer, right? And she had a wonderful voice. The only problem was that she had the worst lisp I've ever heard in my entire life.
Oh, no.
Right?
No.
Swear to hand to God, right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, God bless her. She's not letting this get her down. She's like performing in front of, people and all that. I go, but they couldn't, could they? And they did. They gave her Silver Bells.
No, they did not.
I swear to God. Silver bells, silver bells, it's Christmas time in the city. And my girlfriend,
it's like Daffy Duck.
It was horrible because we're laughing so hard and we're trying to keep it in and all that. But anyway, that's one of my Christmas memories, and I don't know, for some reason it reminded me of that. So I thought, and it has nothing to do with the real estate, but what the heck, Well, we're recording a little bit in advance, like I said. We're going to actually be foregoing Ron's usual news feature, as that might, not seem so timely in mid-December or mid-January when we do post. So we're going to go directly into our guest for today, Ian Mayer. He's the owner of I Am Home Inspections here in Los Angeles. Ian is a InterNACHI certified home inspector. That's International Association of Certified Home Inspectors. And he's a graduate of the American Society of Home Inspectors. He's been in real estate since 2004, and he's just incredibly knowledgeable about home inspections and really making sure that buyers know what's going on inside and out prior to when they buy their home. So, Ian, it's so nice to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, let's just all start this off with a little idea of how you came into just kind of becoming a home inspector. Like what? So you've been in real estate since 2004, you said.
Well, it's an interesting story. Ever since I was a child, I've always had this knack for finding the problem with something. Anything you present to me, I'm like, yeah, but the problem with that is, in most jobs, that got me in a lot of trouble.
Right. You're taking things apart. You're like, it shouldn't be taken apart.
People like kind of took this, well, you're always being negative and you're always looking at the problem. But I got a business degree and I got a job at a wholesale mortgage company.
Okay.
Which was my introduction to real estate and the real estate process. And I started reading books. There's a series of books. First one's called First Break All the Rules, Now Discover Your Strengths. Then there's Good to Great by Jim Collins. So I started reading all these management books, and it was like, if you have something you're good at, do that.
Right.
And so I started working at this wholesale mortgage company, and the managers there were very nice, and they were very into the same books that I was. And they were like, you know what? You have this knack for problems. We've got a job for you. They took me to the back and go, here's all our problem loans. The loans that had already been funded had been closed.
But Ron's laughing very hard about this one. Go ahead.
But we're having some issues with, moving them off to the investors, and they're getting kicked back for issues.
Right.
So my job was to sit there and go through all the loans that were getting kicked back and figure out why they're getting kicked back and trying to figure out how to fix them.
Right.
And in particular was, dealing with a lot of appraisal issues.
Right.
I'm getting the appraisal and I'm here in Los Angeles, the house is maybe in Southern California, and there's an investor in New York going, well, I don't like this appraisal. So my job would be to sit there, re-underwrite the loan, re-underwrite the appraisal, and then write these big long reports about why the appraisal is good or not good or whatever. And then argue back and forth with this guy in whoever in New York or Washington, D.C. It always drove me nuts that I'd never had the home inspection. Because at the time, while I'm doing all this, I got enough money to buy my first house, which was a complete fixer-upper.
Right.
It had 4 walls. It had a foundation. That was it.
Right.
The roof was shot. The floors were so shot you could see the ground underneath.
Right.
The plumbing was shot. It needed pretty much everything. And so I'd work all day in the office fixing or reviewing loans and reviewing houses and the issues with them. And then I would go home and work on my own house. And do that all night and all weekend.
So basically, you bought an education almost.
Right. So that kind of got me interested in and I'm sitting here, working on my house going, well, the plumbing is going to cost this much and the roof is going to cost this much. And none of this is being factored in when I'm re-underwriting these loans and re-underwriting these appraisals because the appraisers don't take that into account. And the loans people don't take it into account. And I'm like, it'd be really cool to get, the inspection process done to really understand that. You're arguing on a fraction of a percentage of an interest rate between the wholesale lender and the investor. Well, okay, so now we're arguing about $10,000, which is about the cost of a roof or a repipe.
Right.
And so I got really interested in there's a lot more to the house than just what's going on. And eventually, over time, kind of realized I like to be in the house, tinkering with it all, rather than just sitting in an office reviewing them from far. So, after the loan, the economy kind of crashed. The real estate market fell apart. The mortgage company went out of business. So I did property management for a while and just kind of slowly evolved into doing home inspections and then eventually opened my own company.
Right. Now, is there any kind of formal licensing or what's in terms of or can anybody hang out a shingle and say, I'm a home inspector?
That's an interesting thing. There's a very misconception here in California. In California, there's actually no home inspector license. And a lot of people don't know that because I can't tell you how many agents.
You would hope that there would be, but then it's you find out that there isn't.
Well, there's some pros and cons of that because I talk to inspectors all over the country. But I was going to say, a lot of real estate agents will call me and say, well, are you licensed? I'm thinking,
what license are you talking about?
Right. I have a driver's license.
Yeah.
So the interesting.
By the way, that's a very good way to tell if it's a very inexperienced agent. I mean, if they're asking that question.
But even agents have been around forever. Like
Yeah.
it's a big misconception. But anyway, there's some pros and cons of this. The pros of being in an unlicensed state, because the inspectors who live in licensed states have this issue that licensing in most states is very minimal. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about your driver's license.
Right.
You get your driver's license at 16 or whatever. That doesn't mean you're a great driver. Doesn't mean
Right.
you're an experienced driver. Doesn't mean you've ever been on the freeway.
Right.
But you have a license to drive.
Right.
And inspectors in other states where there is heavy licensing have sort of the same issue, is that you get a license, so now you're a licensed home inspector, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have any great experience at it. And the inspectors who've been doing it for a long time and are really experienced or really innovative kind of go, oh yeah, but now there's this new guy who just had a license yesterday, and now we're being viewed as on the same level.
Right.
Here in a state where we don't have licensing, it forces the consumer to really look a little deeper and not go, well, yeah, he's licensed, he must know what he's talking about. Like, and go, well, no, I need to really
Right.
investigate, go to the website,
Dig a
see
bit-
what's
bit
going
deeper.
on, dig a bit deeper, and kind of distinguish between, the guy who just started yesterday and the people who know what they're doing. On the con side is yes, anyone can just really open up a business and say I'm a home inspector, and if you go on like Craigslist, you see all these listings for like, why pay more? Home inspector, cheap, cheap, cheap. In the end,
Right.
they're written in very poor English.
Yeah.
And these guys, they don't have insurance. They don't have the certifications. They may not belong to one of the major trade organizations. They may not have the schooling. And the really scary thing to me is when you do a Google search for home inspector, all these ads will pop up on the side. You too can be a home inspector for 3 easy payments of $9.99. Study from home. I'm like, do you really want someone who studied from home for
Right.
3 easy payments of $99? Inspecting your house?
Yeah.
So there's that downside.
Right.
But if you do a good job and take the time to do the job right, you stand out.
Yeah. So there are different organizations, like we said, InterNACHI, and what other kind of organizations, like what things that people can kind of look for to direct them that can help them out?
Well, there's 2 big groups: International Association of Home Inspectors, that's I belong to; the American Society of Home Inspectors, who I did my training through. There's also a California version that's just as California. And it is important that inspectors should belong to one of the trade organizations. The only thing as a caution is kind of like a license, and though just because you belong, I mean, that's just a minimum. They all have minimum requirements, and if you go into home inspector forums, they'll sit there and argue till they're blue in the face about which one's best. I've been through all of them. They all have pretty much the same requirements. They all have the same standards, and it's kind of a minimal thing.
Yeah.
So, if you go on a lot of websites, say, well, make sure you always hire an inspector who belongs to one of the trade organizations, and I agree with that, but don't rely on that.
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
To me, I always say, look at the sample report. Go to the inspector's website, see if they have a sample report. If they don't, that's kind of one little red flag.
Yeah.
But if they do, download it and look at it and compare it.
Right.
Because, the inspector requirements are still minimal.
Right. Well, and I think we'll get to kind of what we look for on a report a little bit later on. But you were also, I think we've talked about this before, and you were saying that when you look at someone that you're considering to be your home inspector, that another thing that you might want to consider is you don't want the guy who's, you think he's got all this experience, he's got like 20 years in the business or whatever like that, because he may not know the technology that's out there. That's right. I mean,
this came up to me. I got a call to inspect a house, so I went out there, and I said, "Yeah, this house was just recently inspected." And I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. Then why am I here?
right.
And she says, "Well, do you want to see the report?" I'm like, "Okay." And she hands me this report, and it's just 50 pages of text. There's not a picture in it anywhere.
Oh, geez.
And it's just block text. And she's like, "Yeah, well, the previous buyers, they hired this guy because he claimed he had 30 years experience." And I'm like, looking at the report, like, well, yeah, he did the report like he would have done it 30 years ago.
Right.
We have these things called cell phones, smartphones now. They have cameras on them. You can take pictures. We have
Right.
software. I mean, I've got software as I go around the house. It takes pictures and inputs comments directly into what will be the report
Right.
on my phone. And, there's things like HD cameras. I mean, if there's a roof that's not safe to walk on, you can put an HD camera up there and shoot the roof.
I have actually seen some inspectors actually use FLIR, where they kind of to search for mold. basically.
Yeah, no. And then there's infrared cameras, which I have. So there's a lot of things that have been progressed in an inspection world in the last, 5 to 10 years. And when I talk to guys who've been around for 20, 30 years, they're like, "Oh, I don't need all that. That's not how I did it 20 years ago." I'm like, "Well, that's fine, but does anybody do anything the way they did it 20 years ago?"
Right, and you would hope that something has progressed, and to actually bring more value, to the actual home inspection over the course of 20, 30 years. Yeah, you're taking pictures because then I know that as an agent on the other side, I can tell you how many times I have the other agent say when we're in the middle of negotiations on a request for repairs, and they say, "Well, send over the pictures." You know what I mean? And being able to have that and send it over to them and say, "Yeah, look, there was a leak on the roof. We took a picture of it." And then they go, "Oh, you can't really, it's hard for them to kind of argue when they actually see it in their own two eyes."
And the other thing that came up, it's a very funny story. I was on an inspection with an agent who I thought had been around a long time. And he said something about the water meter. I said, "Oh yeah, and there's a little leak by the water meter." And he walked over to the electrical panel and opened it up and said, "So where's the leak?" And then it just kind of occurred to me, like a lot of people even people who've owned homes or bought homes don't really understand a lot about what the home is. They just know they open the front door, walk in, and that's it. And so I kind of realized, it's not just my job to point out the problems of the house. It's also my job to educate the consumer about what the house is, where the things are, and how it works.
And and here on the podcast, we're very much in about that the person who's potentially buying that home, they need to take responsibility for a lot of these things as well. I mean, at the end of the day, there's this kind of feeling of, oh, well, that guy didn't do that, or that guy didn't do this. But look, if you're not taking the time to sit down and actually read through the inspection report, actually understand what's going on with the home that you're purchasing, then I think you're actually complicit in what is could eventually go wrong. And you're at the end of the day, you have to own the process as well. So that's kind of one of the things that we kind of try to do here as well, is to tell everybody that they need to really start being involved in the process.
Yeah, I always encourage people to show up to the inspection. I get that question a lot. Should I be there? Well, of course you should be there.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, I know there are some inspectors out there who are like, "Well, I don't really want the client bothering me while I'm inspecting." I'm like, "No, come along.
No.
Please, so I can point out things as I go."
Yeah.
Also because, there might be little quirks about the house that aren't necessarily wrong and aren't going to be in the report, but as long as you're here, I can point them out to you.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to come with me and follow me around.
Yeah. So we said that licensing is it's non-existent here in California, but you would want them to be insured though, right?
Yeah, well, because there's no license, there's no requirement for insurance, but obviously there's home inspector insurance out there. We have E&O insurance, much like a real estate agent would. So, that's something you should definitely look for and ask.
Any kind of, in terms of how much or, whatever they...
I don't know. I don't think there's a real issue on that, but sometimes when you when you see the inspectors on like Craigslist advertising these ridiculously cheap prices, realize, well, they're cheap because they're not paying for insurance.
Right. They probably don't have that to cover themselves.
They don't have the cost and the expense that, a legitimate full-time inspector would have.
Right. So let's say that I'm doing my digging, I'm doing my investigating. My agents referred me someone. I've looked on Yelp. I found people with high rankings and all that kind of thing. And I deep dive. I go onto their website, and there's an example of one of their reports. What should I be looking for? Like what should I say? Oh, this guy is probably what Ian is talking about.
There's several things. First off, hopefully it's computer generated. Back in the old days, reports were paper. There was triplicate paper, and guy rocked around and made some scratch marks on it, and kind of like the doctor's note. Good luck reading it. We have progressed to computers. I think 99% of inspectors out there use a computer now, although there are still old guys hanging on to the paper way. I was listening to an inspector podcast the other day with someone who was still bragging that they use paper. I was like, what? That's something to brag about. The other thing is definitely, are there pictures in the report? Just because, a Word document doesn't necessarily contain pictures.
Right.
There should be pictures in the report. And I know some inspectors, they get away with, they take pictures, but they put them all at the end of the report.
Right.
Or they give them to you separately from the report. And you have to sit there and
compile it somehow, right?
compile it somehow. And that drives me crazy.
Right.
I would definitely think, the picture should be with, the list, just the list of what.
If it's talking about the plumbing, it should be with the plumbing.
Right.
The pictures should be right there.
So you want to look.
So you don't
for
have to go
that,
digging.
Which with modern inspection software is really easy.
Shouldn't be a problem.
It shouldn't be a problem, but there's a lot of guys who still don't do it. The other one, and some inspectors will disagree with me this, but I believe in narratives and not just check boxes.
Right.
A lot of reports you see, they're just checking a box.
Yeah.
Yep, there's a wall. Check. Yeah. What does it tell you anything?
Right.
And that's why some inspectors, they go through the whole house in an hour because they just go around and check a bunch of
Right.
boxes and then they're gone. And that doesn't tell you anything.
Right.
So you want to see a report where, hopefully there's no check boxes and someone's taken the time to, type out.
Yeah. And I'll tell you from an agent standpoint, how important that is as well, is that when, like I've said, we go to our negotiations for our request for repairs, the more information that we have that we can point at and say, look, this is what the inspector is saying, other than, leak in water pipe or whatever, you know what I mean? It always gives us, because at the end of the day, we've got to tell a story. We have to be able to go there and in our negotiation and tell a very clear, concise story. And the more information we have always helps with that.
I agree. That's why I don't do check boxes, and I do narratives, and I try to make them as detailed as possible. So
Right.
you have something,
Do you usually in your reports give how to resolve the issue, or is it more of just, no, this is the issue?
Well, there's a little bit, you
Yeah.
refer it to, the specialist.
Right.
If it's an electrical issue, get an electrician. If it's plumbing issue, get a plumber.
Right. Right. So it'll be more like, talk to this guy.
Right.
Got it. What else?
The other thing is a decent length. This is something that comes up on inspector forums. You see this argument a lot. How long should the report be? And I've seen a few inspectors advertise, well, if your report's not 50 pages, you're not getting your money's worth. I'm like, okay, then you go look at their sample report, and a lot of it is fluffed out or a lot of blank pages, and they're stretching it out to make 50. And like if you're doing a small house,
That's like what I used to do with my term papers in college.
Right.
It's like,
to me, the house signifies how long the report's going to be.
Sure.
I mean, if it's a small house that's been very well taken care of, it may only be 20, 30 pages. If it's a large house and it's got a lot of issues, it may be 60, 70 pages.
right.
I had an agent came up to me the other day and says, yeah, I got this report from this other inspector, and it's like 120 pages.
Ooh.
And I'm like, okay. And that's nice detail, but are you really helping the consumer
Right.
at that point? Because who's going to sit there and read all 120 pages?
Jeez.
I mean, yes. So you've got to find a sort of a sweet spot between, not too
Well, it's
short.
probably the illusion of detail at that point too. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? It's not really going to help anything in terms of, yeah, if I have to spend 3 hours, I know as an agent I'd be banging my head against a wall, but especially if it's like a condo, it's like a 1-bedroom condo. Here's your 150-page
Right.
report.
Yeah, so you see that, but I've also heard inspectors, well, my reports are never more than 10 pages long. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, you're not really helping anyone else.
That's not enough either. Yeah.
There's some actual trainers out there who will say, well, your home inspection report should never contain more than 18 pictures.
Really?
And I'm like, but it's so easy.
Yeah.
They say, well, who's got the time for that? Well, you don't have the time for your client. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Really. So, anywhere 30 to 50 pages, I think, is probably adequate for the average house. I mean, definitely if it's got a lot of issues, my reports can get longer.
Yeah.
But, you want to see something long enough to tell you what you need to know, but not so long that you're being drowned in minute details that aren't going to matter.
Right. Cool. So here's the other thing that I was wondering about when we knew that we were going to have you on. Even before it comes time to call you, we're going out looking at houses. We're looking, if I'm with a potential buyer, we look at 20, 30 houses. what maybe can be things that we can be looking for that will kind of help us prior to talking to you, like to make us go, oh, that's not there. Ian said we should probably be looking for that,
Right.
just to kind of maybe possibly weed out some of the not so great choices.
One of the first things I do when entering a house, especially if it's been renovated or flipped or being sold as completely updated, the first thing I do is I walk in the kitchen and I look at the kitchen counter and I look at the outlets.
Right.
And I look and see if there's a ground fault protected circuit outlet on the
Right.
kitchen counter.
Now those everybody understands. Those are the outlets that basically have the button that you can push that basically
Correct.
resets it. Correct.
Because those weren't required until the late 80s.
Right.
So you're not going to see them on an older kitchen. But if someone's advertising a kitchen is updated and renovated and, brand new or whatever, then those should be there. And if they're not there, that tells me instantly, well, okay, whoever did the job probably didn't do a very good job.
They cut corners.
They cut corners.
Now, does it need to be done in order to be permitted, or is that
Correct.
Yeah. So
So-
I might tell you that work wasn't permitted as well.
This is exactly true. They don't have to have a button in each one. They can be tied together in series.
Right.
But that's the first thing I look for. That tells me a lot right there about how good of work was being done.
Quality of work. Right.
Another strange one, not strange one, but there's a rule that no point along the kitchen counter should be more than 2 feet from an outlet. So you should try to have an outlet every 4 feet along a kitchen counter. Again, this really didn't come into play until the early 2000s. So you're not going to see them on older homes. But when the kitchen is advertised as completely renovated or
Right.
completely updated,
Right.
then, well, if you're saying updated, that means you're saying you built it to current standards, which
Right.
means that should be there. So that's something else, you can kind of look at. And you don't see it in older homes.
Right.
Well, it wasn't there before, so they don't put one in. Well, then don't call it updated.
Right. Right.
So that's one other thing. Another one is look outside. Look for the electric wires. Where the wires are coming.
The
into
electric
house.
wires that come into the house.
Right.
Okay.
If you're up in Santa Cruz, they're generally all buried underground. So you're
Right.
not going to see them. Most of the valley they're
Above.
above.
Right.
Look, are they going through trees? Are they low hanging? Does it look like you can reach up and grab them? Just think, because you don't want your trees rubbing against your electrical wires,
Right.
because it could sever the wire or cause a spark, and you don't want it so low that you can reach up and grab it. You don't want it going directly over your pool.
Right. So go a little bit more deeper into the pool aspect. So I literally just had a house that I saw that had the wire over the pool. So what is the rule? What are the rules with that?
Yeah, well, see, the current rule is electric wire should be 22.5 feet above a pool and 10 feet horizontally away.
So it can go above the pool.
Right.
It just has to be a certain height above it.
However, the rule previous was 18 feet, and then previous to that, which was the late 70s, there were no rules. And if you're in our area, being the San Fernando Valley in general Southern California, most of these pools were built in the 60s and
Right.
70s,
Right.
well before any of these rules were ever put in place.
Which, even in the 1960s, people could get electrocuted. So I don't know who built that house and said, oh, no, we're fine. We're good,
No, it boggles my mind that, all through the 60s and 70s, people thought electricity, water, no problem.
No problem. Come on.
So you see that a lot, and there's not a lot you can do about, especially if it's on a smaller lot. Like there's no place to put the wires.
Right. Right.
But it's something to at least be aware of and be conscious of that. This could be an issue, and if you do have a chance to do some renovations, maybe you can move the wires at least to the edge of the property.
Right. Right. What else?
So that's a good one. What else we got? If you're going through the house looking at light bulbs, because if the light bulbs are missing, it could just be missing light bulb. It could also be a damaged fixture.
Sure.
And you can't really know. And if it's an older house and it's a fixer-upper, there's probably lots of lights missing. But it drives me crazy if I'm in $1 million house
Yeah.
and there's light bulbs missing.
Yeah.
Because it really makes me think, you're the listing agent, because you're trying to get $1 million for the house. Why didn't you make sure that all the light bulbs worked?
Absolutely. It's those details. And we'll go into a little bit more about like things that the sellers can do prior to putting their house on the market. But this is so like, this seems like just such common sense. If I walk into a house and I see that there's a light bulb that isn't working, it could be one of two things. The light bulb is busted or there's something wrong there. And why have the potential buyer walk into your home and for a second think, oh, I wonder if there's an electrical problem. You know what I mean? It's you take that completely off the table.
Right.
Replace the damn bulb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, as a home inspector, I'm not walking around with a pocket full of light bulbs.
Yeah, right. Right.
The other thing is double key deadbolts, where you've got a key on the inside of the door to get out. This is, a violation of fire code, because if your house is on fire, you need to be able to get out the door. You can't be searching for a key.
Yeah, right.
And even if you
was it in my pants? This pants I'm wearing now, or is this? Yeah.
And people say, "Well, I left the key in it." Well, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So that's an issue that comes up a lot. I see that a lot. And people, and there's a little bit of people who will say, "Well, the police officer told me because of the glass right there, someone could bust the glass and open the door, so I put the key there, lock there, to prevent someone from busting it open." I'm like, well, that's fine, but it's still a violation of fire safety.
Right.
So, if you're going to do that, take it out before you put the house on the market.
Right. Right.
Because it's going to get called out.
Right.
Here's a real easy one. If you've got an attached garage, as we do in a lot of homes, the door between the house and the garage must self-close and latch.
Right.
Because your garage is considered a fire hazard and also considered a source of carbon monoxide because if you actually park a car in there.
Yep.
So your garage door must self-close and latch to keep the gases from the car coming into the house. And if a fire starts in your garage, to keep the fire from coming, well, it won't keep it from coming in the house, but slow it down.
Right. Right.
And that's a real easy test. Open the garage door, see what happens.
Right.
Does it close?
Right.
If it closes, great. If not, it needs to be fixed.
Right.
Going on that one, the next one would be a pet door to the garage door. A lot of people put, pet door so their little dog can go out and either go to the garage.
That's where they eat. They eat out in the garage.
They eat out in the garage, or maybe they have a second door, that goes from the garage or from the home to the garage, and then from the garage to the outside.
Yeah.
And they do a series of pet doors,
right.
But again, that you're violating the fire barrier,
right,
and the carbon monoxide barrier,
right.
So pet doors in the door from the home to the garage is a no.
Right.
That should be taken out.
Right.
Now, the other one is look for the AC condenser. Sometimes they're on the roof when you're not going to be able to see it, but most of the time they're somewhere in the yard.
Right.
Take a look at it. Is it full of rust? Is it damaged? And another one is male dogs love to mark their territory on AC grills.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the acid in their urine will basically eat through the grill of your condenser.
Interesting.
You can always tell if the seller's had a male dog.
Right.
And sometimes you'll see people build a little fence around their condenser, which is really smart to keep the dog off of it.
Right.
But that's something you can easily look at. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be able to tell how well it works, but if it obviously is full of rust or full of damage, that's going to give you a hint right there.
Right.
Another one I'm always surprised. I used to ask this about when people called to book their inspection, and I stopped asking because I was amazed how many people didn't know the answer. Is the foundation a raised foundation or is it a slab foundation?
Yeah.
So, if it's a raised foundation, do you step up into the property?
Right.
Is there a gap between the floor, the bottom of the floor of the living room and the ground?
Right.
If there's a gap, then you've got a raised foundation and there's a crawl space under there. If it's not so much of a step up, it's just 8-inch concrete, then you're on a slab.
Right. Is there necessarily a plus or minus with that?
There's pros and cons to both. In other parts of the country, it doesn't hold to this as well as it does right here in the San Fernando Valley, but generally houses built before the mid 60s are almost always crawl space.
Right.
Anything from the 50s kind of goes either way, but from mid 60s on, everything has been slab.
Right.
So the crawl space versus slab, not so much about the foundation, but it kind of tells you, well, if you're buying an older home or a newer home.
Right. Right.
Crawl spaces tend to have more issues only because they're older, not really so much because of the construction. But the advantage is you can get under there and fix them.
A lot easier.
Where a slab is newer, it's going to have a lot less issues,
But you got to crack open the
Yeah, but if there is something you have to fix, then it becomes really expensive.
Right.
And so that kind of goes, and if you've got a house from the 40s and it's going to have a crawl space, then that brings up the question, well, is the plumbing good?
Right.
Is it proper galvanized?
Sure.
Are there other issues going on there? Is it bolted to the foundation, which is a big issue we have in California on older homes? And, these are the questions that will then be raised if you have a crawl space. Then you need to have, you want the inspector to check out.
Right.
If it's a slab, you're not going to have any of those issues. And it's a slab. The plumbing is buried underneath the concrete.
Yeah.
And as long as it's, we don't have obvious signs of walls cracking and the house falling apart, then you're probably pretty good on all those issues.
Right. And one last one. What do you think? One more, you think?
Roof.
Yeah.
Well, I can't tell you how many times I've showed up to the house and the agent's like, oh, this is a fantastic house. I don't think you're going to find anything wrong with it. And I'm like, I haven't even walked up the driveway and I'm already seeing stuff.
Right.
So I tell agents, I tell people, when you're standing in the driveway with the house, just tilt your head back like 5 degrees.
Right.
10 degrees. Look up at the roof.
Right.
Obviously, you're not going to get up on a ladder and go walking around. That's the inspector's job.
Yes.
But just look, is there anything obvious?
Right.
If the roof is 2 different colors, that gives you a sign that something's happened.
Right.
If you see shingles falling off or missing, that gives you an indication something's happened.
Right.
If there's tiles missing, some things are actually that obvious that people just don't pay attention to because they're so focused on, what's the kitchen look like?
Yeah.
What kind of countertops do I have?
Right.
And it's, staring you right in the face. So
Right. So, okay. So let me see. Why don't we do this? Let's say we have Joe and Jill Smith. They've just gone at escrow on the house, right? And they call you up. They say, we need you to come over, take a look at the house, give it a good once over. Let's literally go from walking in the front door. What do you one by one? What do you really look for in terms of let's see, say the kitchen. You say that's one of the things you first look for is when you're in the kitchen. What do you look at?
Well, when generally I arrive at the house, generally start actually on the outside. I want to walk around, check out the exterior.
Start on the outside. Okay.
I'm looking at the stucco. Is it full of cracks?
Right.
I mean, stucco cracks anyway. There's always going to be something minor. Get a general idea of what's going on with the house. Looking to see if it's a slab or a crawl space. Looking at the windows, the eaves, kind of getting the pre-roof. Then I'll go inside. Just start in the kitchen. So, then I want to put the built-in appliances through their paces.
Right.
Start the dishwasher, look at the plumbing of the dishwasher, garbage disposal, sink. Do we have hot water? Does the cooktop? Here's a good one. The range. If there's a range.
Yeah.
There's a little bracket that comes with the range to allow you to bolt the back of the range to the wall so that if a kid pulls down the range opening and steps on the stove trying to get onto the counter to get to the cookies, it doesn't fall over.
Got it.
Now, this is been a federal law since the mid-90s that every range comes with it. And 99% of the people forget to install it because it's just this little teeny metal bracket.
Really?
You pull the range out of the box. You've got this big range.
Yeah, what is this?
You put it in, and the little bracket, it's generally taped to the manual, and no one opens the manual because, how hard is it to turn the stove on?
Right.
And they forget to install it. And that's one of the, that's something every inspector's going to look for, is it tip forward. And if you got buyers with kids, that becomes
Absolutely.
That becomes an issue. Buyers who don't have kids, they tend to not so much care, but.
Yeah.
So that's something. And then, like I said, we look at the vent fan. Does it work? If there's a built-in microwave, does that work?
Right. What about the bedrooms?
Bedrooms are real simple. You're looking at windows.
Yeah.
Do the windows open?
Right.
Because every bedroom is supposed to have an emergency egress.
Right.
One thing that comes up on older homes is sometimes the windows are high.
Right.
Modern requirements is 44 inches. Windows should be no higher than 44
because you need
inches.
to climb out of it if there's some sort of emergency.
A lot of houses built in the 60s and earlier, they don't have that.
Right.
And there's no rule or requirement to lower them because it'd be astronomically expensive.
Right.
That's something you want to look at. But you don't want to make sure the window's open. I've seen on multiple houses someone screwed the window shut.
Right.
or someone's put bars across the window because they don't want anyone to break in. I'm like, well, that's
but you
fine.
can't.
But you need to be able to get out.
Right.
And then you're checking all the outlets, or at least all the outlets you can get to.
Right.
Making sure they're wired properly.
What about bathrooms?
Bathrooms, and then I'm going through, the sink, the shower, bathtub, I'm testing, making sure there's hot water.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times on a flip
Really?
they forget to hook up the hot water to like the shower.
That's
or the
hysterical.
bathtub. I was in one house. I mean, it was like $1 million renovation. Everything was beautiful. This big, huge, gorgeous whirlpool type tub had no hot water.
Oh my God. You would think that would be a prerequisite.
You would think, but if you've ever watched Flipping Vegas,
Yeah.
you
No, I have not. What is that?
it's a show about house flipping in Vegas.
Okay.
And the guy who flips the houses, he's always yelling at his guys, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We got to make the open house. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And I'm just like, well, that's just what happens when you hurry up and you don't take your time. You end
Right.
up with no hot water at the bathtub.
Right.
So, I want to test the bathtub. I want to test the diverter between the shower and the tub if there is one. Flush the toilets, make sure everything's cocked.
Right.
Most bathrooms are missing caulking. I mean, it's not a huge thing in the world, but you want to make sure it's there.
Sure.
So that you're not getting water down.
Watertight. Yeah.
Water into the walls.
Right. What about just like the general living areas, like the den or the living room? Anything that you can look out for those?
Well, you're generally just making sure again the windows open and the outlets are working order.
Right.
Looking at the ceiling, is it caving in? Is there obvious water? That's the easy stuff.
Right.
Getting the attic, the crawl space, that's where it becomes the less stuff more obvious because anyone can walk in and see the living room. Is it painted? Yeah, okay.
Right. What about the systems? Like your air conditioning, your plumbing. Like, what do you look for in those areas?
Well, plumbing, I mean, you're going through the kitchen, your bathroom, and you're turning everything on and off.
Right.
If there's a crawl space, then you're going to get underneath and look at the plumbing from underneath.
Right.
AC, air heating, obviously you're going to turn them on.
Yeah.
I have a temperature gun. I go around to all the ducts and make sure they work because I can't I've met multiple agents at like a mixer or something. They'll say, you know what? I really liked the home inspector who did my house, except for they didn't tell me the heater wasn't connected to the duct in the bedroom. And like that just sticks in the back of my head. Like, I don't want to be that guy. So
Yeah.
I have my little temperature gun and I walk around and measure
Every one of the vents.
Each vent that, there's hot air coming through or cold air coming through.
Right.
So, and then you got to get up and you got to find the actual unit. You want to get the serial number off the unit because that'll show you how old it is.
Right.
And look at the general condition of it.
Right.
So if the furnace is in the attic, you get in the attic and crawl over to it and then unscrew the
Speaking of the attic, what do you see up there? What's attic and crawl space?
attic is, definitely you want to try and get, I mean, not every attic you can get into.
Right.
You should hopefully get into most of them. But see, this is where the interesting thing about going back to the inspector societies. All the standards say you don't actually have to get in the attic.
Really?
And they put that in there because if there's a danger to the inspector, they don't want the client to be able to say, well, you didn't go in the attic, and the inspector's going, well, it was dangerous. So they don't actually put the requirement in. Trouble is some inspectors take that a little too literally and don't go into the attic, period.
Right.
Which drives me nuts.
Right.
So if the attic if there's a way to get in the attic, obviously you want to get in the attic. Sometimes you can't because there's no room, and sometimes there's just a little, service porch.
Yeah.
Kind of thing to walk around. And if there's a way to get around the whole thing, then you can get around the whole thing.
Sure. Now, if you're up there, I mean, well, what are the other things? I know that you're basically a general home inspector. There are people who have very specific specialties. But you're actually calling things out though, right? In terms of if you see something that looks like somebody's like a whole flock of termites has been eating at this, whatever, or the sewer is like I'm getting the drainage is not going fast enough. Like you might want to call. That's something you're still calling out, correct?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, termites is a thing. I mean, the state of California has very strange pest inspection rules that differ from other states, but a home inspector is not allowed to use the T word. We can only say wood rot. And then you have to get a licensed pest inspector to actually determine if it's termite or fungus or what.
Right.
But obviously, I'm looking for signs of wood rot.
Right.
And if I see signs, and if I see termites, I'm going to take a picture of it and say, evidence of insect infestation, get a pest inspection. the common thing in attics are electrical junction boxes missing covers, and that's considered a fire hazard and a shock hazard,
Right.
Because if there's arcing between the wires, is the reason the junction box is supposed to have cover to prevent any arcing from jumping out. And almost every attic seems to have a missing junction box cover. And you're looking at the levels of insulation, what kind of insulation. It's here in Southern California, it's common to have very little to no insulation. Guys in the Midwest are always talking about how many feet of insulation there. I'm like, I'm happy if there's a couple inches. You get out to the Oxnard or to any of the beach cities, a lot of those
Right.
houses have no insulation, and nobody cares because
It pretty much stays the same temperature all
Yeah,
year
right.
round, right? So, okay, so you've gone through, you've done your inspection.
Mm-hmm.
It's now 2-3 days later. What is the time frame usually for you to turn around your inspection reports usually?
24 hours.
24 hours, great. And so now you send it off to Joe and Jill. What do you take them hand by hand and talk them through it, or do you?
Hopefully they've attended the inspection.
Yeah. So do you do that? So maybe before you even leave,
Right.
you're actually going over these things.
I mean, preferably if they can follow me around, I can point out things as we go.
Right.
Or at least if they're there at the end, we can then walk through the house
right,
and point out at least the major things,
Right.
the bigger things. So they already have an idea.
right,
And, I've had people make decisions before they even get the report,
Right.
just based on that. And then, I send them the report generally within 24 hours. And, at that point, sometimes they call me back or email me and ask me questions, and sometimes they don't.
yeah,
If they're working with a good agent like yourself, the agent's going to be able to walk them through what's big, what's minor,
Right.
what can we ask for.
right,
I'm always surprised. I had one house in particular, like it was a beautiful flip. It looked really nice until I got to the foundation and the crawl space, and I'm like, someone had put the wrong year in the MLS. Someone had put a 2008 date in the MLS that this house was built in 2008. And I get down to the crawl space and I'm like,
no way,
this is a 1920s home.
right,
For a lot of people that are freaked out, this one agent, though, he managed to figure out, like, well, okay, what's it going to cost?
yeah,
Go back to the seller and renegotiate, come up with a balance point between that made the buyer happy and the seller happy and everybody happy.
right.
That's where the agent having.
From an agent standpoint, one of the kind of the key things, and it's not the only thing, of course, but one of the kind of the key things is when you go for your request for repairs, it's sort of the stuff that you couldn't see when you first walked through the house. That's kind of like the guideline that I kind of use with my clients. I'm like, when you walk through the house, if you, hand to God, I had one client where they were buying a house, and there was this enormous boulder that was in the backyard. And they're like, oh, and by the way, we want the boulder removed. I was like, hold on a second. When you bought the house, you saw that there was this big boulder back there. We figured that into the price of the house. See, that's when you're supposed to be, when you give the offer on the house, that's when you start talking about things you can see. The request for repairs is a good guideline. And like I said, this isn't always the case, but the good guideline is if you walk through, you didn't see it, that's what you're asking for in terms of the request for repairs.
Every client's different. I was inspecting $1 million house in Granada Hills, and I was like, wow, what a beautiful kitchen. The client turned to me and says, yeah, we don't really like it. We're going to gut it and move it over there. I'm like, okay. And then I was in another house, and the kitchen was very 80s. Old tile, old cabinets, the tile's cracked. And the client walked in and was like, this is my dream kitchen. I'm not touching a thing.
God bless them.
So,
God bless them.
I love, it's another reason why I love when the client's there. I can kind of like maybe ask them, like, is this going to be just for you? Do you have kids? Do you have a family? Are you planning on renovations? Are you planning on moving in as is? Not that it's going to change how I inspect, but puts me in the right mindset of what they're looking at.
Right. And I want to also kind of interject at this point also that and the big question that I keep on, that I always get with my clients is that when they're going in to put an offer on a house, that especially if it's already been in escrow before, it's like, well, why didn't it go through escrow? Why did the deal fall through? And did they find something that, maybe they're not? The seller's obligated to disclose that if anything is found there, if they've had an inspection before, they are required to give that inspection back over to the new buyer. So that is something that it's not exactly a protection. You should never just rely on that, and you should also be getting your own inspector through. But that is something that just as a certain, they're ethically, you can actually take them to court if they don't do that. So that's
one of the houses I was talking about the roof, and then they showed up and they just said, "You won't find anything wrong with this house." And I'm looking at the roof, going, "Of course the roof is bad. I can tell from here."
yeah. Right.
Well, when the agent then called the seller agent to say, "Well, you were canceling escrow because we found the roof to be bad, and they weren't able to fix it in negotiations," they're like, "Oh yeah, you're the second person who canceled on the roof." Like, why didn't you disclose it?
Yeah.
You're supposed to disclose it, but it doesn't always mean they do. The other point I would definitely say is, even if you've got a report from a previous inspector, that inspector is not your client.
Right.
He's not necessarily going to be she's not necessarily going to be obligated to take your phone call and answer follow-up questions.
Right.
So it's always a good idea to get your own inspector, because then you have a report that is yours in your name, and now you've got someone you can go to afterwards and call up and ask questions.
Yeah, I think the main concern is, though, with at least my clients has been is somebody hiding something. And the whole thing is that, well, if they've had an inspection, we have to hear about it. Mm-hmm. So that you should check that off of your concern list. If there is something, you should also be getting an inspector to find it on your own. But if they've found something before, they have to disclose it.
Right.
Okay. Ron, what's up?
So one of the things, and the reason why I've been quiet, is because the lender is typically not involved in the property inspection at all. Right. So this is something between the buyer, and it's their own report. When a lender does get involved is primarily when the appraisal comes out and there is something to the effect of noticeable wood rot damage, right? So that's when the underwriter may say, "I want a copy of the inspection report." Other cases, it could be that the roof has zero life, right? So if they make inflammatory remarks, or there's something that doesn't sit right with the underwriter, the lender may ask for a copy of that inspection. So have you seen any cases with lenders requesting copies of the inspection?
It doesn't happen very often, but yes, it comes up every now and then. And as I told you earlier, how I got into it is I was on the lending side going, why don't we get copies of the inspection report? Kind of drives me crazy that we didn't. So yeah, 98% of the time I don't think the lender gets it, but every once in a while I'll get a phone call from a lender, or the agent will tell me, the lender requested to see it and they sent it on and they had whatever question. Carbon monoxide detectors are, we have rules about that. And I did have one condo come back, "Well, the lender's upset that you didn't take a good picture of the carbon monoxide detector." And I thought, since when does the lender care?
And that's typically in the appraisal. So
Right, it's typically in the appraisal. But now I've just put it in the back of my mind. Take a picture of the carbon monoxide detector so it doesn't come back.
Right.
Right. And when the appraisal comes back and you see something that is subject to, that means that you need to, whatever that is, you need to make those repairs to either it's installing the carbon monoxide detector or a smoke alarm or whatever it is. That has to be completed prior to actually funding the loan.
Correct.
So one thing that I would say is we're talking to a lot of buyers out there, is if the lender doesn't ask for the inspection report, don't send it to them.
Right.
Right? That's really
Amen.
key. That's really key. And that's also where you could tell if you're working with a weak agent, someone who's new, is we're like, "Hey, I got the inspection report. Here you go, Mr. Lender." You're like, I didn't see that.
Yeah, exactly.
Having done the underwriting, I'm like, the underwriter's got plenty to look at with the appraisal, the title report. I mean, have you ever read it? Obviously, you read title reports. They're not very fun to read, but you got to read them.
Right. And don't open any can of worms that doesn't need to be opened.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, just wrapping up here, just in terms of, look, for the most part, the people that come and I hope are listening to this podcast, their main feeling is that they've got this feeling of anxiety, stress about every step of this process. So, like, what would you want to tell, a future client about basically this whole process in terms to not get so stressed out about it, get over it?
Well, clients call me or email me afterwards, and they'll say, "Well, do you think I should buy this house?" And outside of the obvious, like, well, I've already got my own house.
Yeah.
But it comes down to, well, anything that's possibly wrong can be fixed.
Yeah.
Everything can be fixed. I mean, even bad foundations, you can check the house up and put a new foundation on.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, do you want to spend the money to do it? Do you want to go through the time and effort
Right.
that it's going to take to bring the house up to where you think it is?
Right. Right. And just to kind of basically say that there is no a final answer here. I mean, there's not a yes or a no.
Mm-hmm.
Look, you got maybe this issue. Well, that's going to cost you X.
Mm-hmm.
You got this issue. If that's something that you guys can overcome, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you buy this house?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're maybe passing up a gem that somebody else is overlooking because of that. If you're thinking that that's an expenditure that you don't mind making, God bless you. Get in there, and you'll have something that you'll maybe get into a house that's maybe in a better area, but lower price because you were able to negotiate because of this issue that was found.
The other thing is, no house is perfect.
Right. Exactly.
I've never walked out of a house and not found at least something.
Exactly.
Maybe just due to age, maybe just due to wear.
Right. I think people are just so kind of anxious about making a mistake that they literally, they just free. Oh, what if I get a house that has X, Y, or Z wrong? Well, look, every house has something. As soon as you start thinking that way, it's like, okay, well, we can overcome that. There should be no reason to be afraid of this process.
And even sometimes I'll have a list of like 20 things that are being wrong, and okay, there are 20 things that are wrong, but they're all something a handyman could fix as a single.
Exactly. Right. And maybe one or two that are just kind of like, yeah, you probably want to take care of that. Well, how much does it take to take care of that? X. Okay. Right. Can you do X?
And, obviously it's not my place to say, but sometimes these things are taken into consideration in the price.
Yeah.
Why is this house cheaper than the one next door? Well, the AC is rusted, needs to be replaced. How's that going to cost? Well, it's going to cost whatever, $10,000. Well, I suppose that house is $10,000 less than the one next door. Right. But I can't really get into that. I leave that to the agent. But these are things I explain to my clients.
Right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here, Ian. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. I want to have you back. We want to talk about things from the seller's point of view, what can possibly be done pre-inspection and things like that. So I hope that you'll be back with us in the future.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, that's about it for today. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to leave them for us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Clarified Realty Podcast, all one word. Like I said before, you can email me directly at tom@clarifiedrealty.com. For more exclusive bonus content and advice between episodes, please check out our website, www.clarifiedrealty.com. Also on our homepage, you'll find links to helpful buyer and seller guides that can give you some great information for starting your home buying or home seller process. So check those out. I'm on Snapchat, Twitter, and Instagram as well. My handle for all three of those are @ClarifiedRealty. I beg of you, please, please, please leave feedback and reviews on iTunes or in the comments section on our page. My amazing theme song, Hey Now, is from the band Wolf. That's Wolf with 2 Fs. And please go check them out and like them on SoundCloud. We'll also leave a link to the song in the credits if we can. They rock so hard that they can score a #1 Billboard single with just a 5-minute recording of them tuning their guitars. And just a little disclaimer, Ron and I are licensed by the California Bureau of Real Estate. My license number is 01715353. Ron's is
Guaranteed rate, NMLS 2611, NMLS ID 558706, California.
The advice we give is only for properties located in the state of California. For all other states, please contact your local real estate agent or real estate professional. That's about it. Ron, you good?
I'm great, Tom.
Great. Well, thanks for coming by, everybody. And remember, the greatest thing you can ever do is make someone feel at home. Take care. We'll see you next week.
What you gonna do with your